Good afternoon. First of all, my apologies for the late start. I want to thank everyone who is with us today for being here, for participating in this important hearing. I want to thank and welcome all of my colleagues for being here as well, and our staff. Looking forward to this afternoon's hearing. I'm Assembly Member Rob Bonta. I am the chair of the Assembly Committee on Public Employees, Retirement, and Social Security. And this is our joint informational hearing of the Assembly and the Senate Policy Committees on issues related to public employment and retirement. And I also want to thank and welcome my colleague on the Senate side, Chairman Pan, Dr. Pan. And want to thank all of our presenters for preparing and making the time to be with us today. Look forward to hearing from you on current important issues related to our public retirement systems, and also looking forward to hearing from all the key departments and stakeholders as we approach these issues this year. And we're hoping to get a bit of a preview into some of the various issues that may be coming down the pike this year in Policy Committee. So this is a good opportunity to start addressing those before we start hearing bills. In addition, we'll be hearing from the California Actuarial Advisory Panel. In 2011, AB 1247 created a requirement for a representative of the panel to regularly appear before a joint hearing of these committees to discuss specific findings in the CalPERS annual financing report. We welcome the opportunity to hear that presentation today. And finally, I want to welcome all my colleagues who are here with us today. Some may be coming in and out at different times, but Ms. Waldron, Mr. Cooley, Mr. O'Donnell, Dr. Pan, and I want to give Dr. Pan an opportunity to make opening remarks, and then we'll turn it over to our colleagues to make any opening remarks if they wish to make some. Thank you again, everyone, for being here. Looking forward to today's hearing.
All right, well, thank you so very much, Assemblymember and Chair Bonta, and I'm pleased to join you today and my committee as well for today's informational hearing. I think you're doing double duty today, chairing the Health Committee earlier this morning, which I was at, and then as well as this afternoon. So I don't think you get double pay for that, though, unfortunately. We can talk about that later. So anyway, I want to welcome all of you here who are on today's agenda, as well as those attending the audience. Historically, our committees have had an informational hearing for our members at the start of every two-year session, and today's hearing will provide an opportunity for our members to become more familiar with the various retirement systems and departments under a committee's jurisdiction, and to learn about some of the issues we'll be looking over in the coming session. This year, I want to note that we've also asked the Department of Health Human Resources to give us more information about the governor's plans for civil service reform, which he referred to in his budget proposal, and how he plans to implement changes through the collective bargaining process. So with that, let's go ahead and get going, and I'm going to turn the hearing back over to Chairman Bonta.
Thank you. Would any members like to make any opening remarks before we get started with the panel? Ms. Waldron, Mr. Cooley, Mr. O'Donnell? Okay. All right, well, let's dig in then. Our first panel will be, or our first presenter will be Mr. Jack Enos, Chief Executive Officer of CalSTRS. Just one.
Ready to go? All right, good afternoon. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Jack Enos. I'm the CEO of CalSTRS. And I think we've passed out just one document I was going to refer during our 10 minutes together, and that's this colorful little chart about CalSTRS, because it is a different kind of pension system, and I was hoping that's one of the things we could distinguish in today's commentary, is how this kind of is different than the other public pension systems. But to start out, I've been CEO of CalSTRS for just over 13 years, and unfortunately, probably 10 of those 13 years, I've been before this committee many times talking about the impact of the recession on the portfolio, the struggles with the recession in the portfolio, the growing unfunded obligations of the portfolio that reached about $74 billion. So this is a welcome opportunity, actually, in my 13 years to be here today, because it's a milestone in the 102-year history of CalSTRS. The passage of legislation last June, AB 1469, has truly put CalSTRS on a different financial course. And the things we're concerned about, the priorities for the system, are now around execution, not developing a plan, not worrying about a plan, not trying to debate a plan after a lot of years of consideration. but obviously around executing that plan and make sure the plan works for us over 30 years. And I'll talk more about that. But that's the punchline of the 10 minutes. There's no doubt about it. This year is remarkably different, and in no small measure the leadership of these two committees. It was not just the fact that there were a lot of numbers floating around unfunded obligations, but developing a complex plan that addressed that and recognized the needs of so many stakeholders, but to do it in a transparent fashion. And the number of hearings that you all conducted really put it on the table. The difficulties with this and the sacrifice that would have to be made by our members, and by the state, and by our employers. So I think, and I can talk more about that later, the struggles we see in other states, particularly the implosion in Illinois and New Jersey right now around their public pension systems and their inability to reach solutions, stands in stark contrast to the process you used last year and where we are today. So let me start out by saying a few things about the system. We're one of the oldest pension systems in the United States. Teacher systems were at the forefront of establishing public pensions before a lot of other public bodies. So at 102 years plus, we kind of stand as one of the oldest in the system. Two things that stand out, though, that we always need to remember talking about teachers in California is that we are the largest block of workers in the United States that are not in Social Security. So when we talk about pension reform or financial security, we need to remember it is CalSTRS that is the bedrock of that guarantee. It is not Social Security for these members. I'm old enough to remember growing up with this concept, this financial concept of a three-legged stool, that if you did everything right in life, you had a pension, you had Social Security, and you had some personal savings. And if you did all three of those right in your life, then hopefully you had a quality retirement, and that's what we kind of focused people on. This chart I've given you is our version of the three-legged stool for a school teacher. So it's different language and it's different things, but this is what a teacher needs to do to keep their retirement upright and reach a quality life. And I think one of the misunderstandings about public pensions is two things. One is the assumption is that the defined benefit plan takes care of everything, that you can just sit back and you're going to end up with this pension that takes care of all of your financial needs. Very untrue. In this chart, as you see, and it's meant to be actually proportional, the defined benefit plan for CalSTRS on average represents about 53% of a retiree's income. So I think the language we all like to use is that's a great benefit, it's a guaranteed benefit, it's a solid benefit backed by the sponsorship of the state. But if you're talking to any financial planner with any sense, you know that you need to focus on at least 85% of your pre-retirement income. And if your retiree health care is not taken care of, there is a lot of perspectives that you need over 100% in retirement. So this is the three-legged stool. A teacher needs to focus on other things. The defined benefit plan is good, but it is not the whole pie. Now, we are pretty unique in having that left slice on here, that cash balance plan, and that may not be a form of pension plan you're all familiar with, but it is used in the private sector, not as much in the public sector. But it's been a rather innovative feature of the plan. Teachers work overtime. They teach extra classes, they coach teams, etc. What do you do with those earnings in a pension plan? Well, what we don't want at CalSTRS is we don't want those extra earnings kicking up the pension. I think you all can appreciate the perspectives of all of us that are in the business or the public to see it doesn't make a lot of sense to have a pension that's bigger than your base earnings when you retire. And this is a bit of a check on the system, and I think it's a good one. So if you work overtime as a teacher, you make contributions, the school makes contributions of the same amount, and those go into essentially an account for you, a savings account. It's kind of a combination of a 401k and a defined benefit plan because it has a very, very modest financial guarantee to it. So over half of the teachers in California do that, and that means they're going to have extra savings to get them to that replacement ratio in retirement. The third piece is voluntary. It's a defined contribution plan. And remember, if you know the history of retirement in the United States, this is actually originally how the private sector did it. They had defined benefit plans as the core of retirement, and they would offer a 401k as a supplement, not as the core for retirement. And that's what this is here too. And one of our challenges is getting teachers to save more and save early in life. And for all of us, you know, that financial literacy, understanding the importance of it, that is one of our biggest educational challenges running a pension system, so that teachers actually put money in there when they're in their 20s. So that's the basic structure of the benefit. We call it a hybrid retirement system because we don't want a teacher to be passive and think, well, the defined benefit plan just takes care of everything. We want teachers to be active when they get hired, to think about the pension plan, think about how to save, and get involved in this from the very beginning. So there are no surprises when they reach retirement. So again, final points, we're not in Social Security. The defined benefit plan is their guarantee form of retirement. And secondly, the majority of teachers, this surprises people, the majority of teachers in California get 0 contributions from the schools for retiree health care. Now, there are exceptions to that, like Los Angeles, which have strong retiree health care packages. But if we looked at all the teachers across the state, get out of Los Angeles, and look at the broader coverage, the majority actually do not receive financial assistance. So again, that's the importance of focusing on this pie. So that's the big picture. So let me go to the funding of the plan, where we are from the work you did last year. First of all, I want to say, because I'm so close to my colleagues from around the country as they struggle with the unfunded obligations in their systems, and so often those turn into partisan debates in other states. And you can see that playing out in Illinois and New Jersey right now. I think what was so special about California's solution for CalSTRS last year now is, one, the transparency you used in addressing the problem. But secondly, in the end, when it came time to vote on this piece of legislation, we saw strong support from both parties. And that surprises people. I think people like to translate this into a pro or anti-worker, or a pro or anti-union, or a pro or anti-tax issue, or a pro or anti, you name it. And in fact, there are aspects of this that are important, because we are a significant part of obviously the financial standing of the state, because the state is the sponsor of this plan. So the bipartisan support for the funding of this, I think, stands out not just as a California story, but as a national story. The plan that you adopted provides for graduated increases in contributions for the members, and we increased those as much as we could by law. It involves significant increases for contributions by the schools. The package in the end over that 30 years will mean schools will pick up about a little over 70% of the costs of those increased contributions. And the state also pitched in considerably. The state will be at its maximum contribution rate, contributing 8.8% of payroll, and that's a significant step forward for the state as well. The final piece of the funding that, I would just want to make sure you didn't get the full punchline of what happened after the bill. Just before you passed the bill, you asked us a question: what would happen to the GASB accounting reporting of these liabilities? And if you remember, there are new accounting standards in the United States that are just taking effect. And if a funding plan is not in place, the assumptions that you have to use are very onerous. Prior to you passing this bill, we would have had to list on our financial statements our unfunded obligation at $145 billion. That amount of money would have then had to be translated and placed on the financial statements of all the school districts in California. You can imagine what a financial statement would look like if we suddenly passed out $145 billion to all those schools. That changed because there is a firm funding plan in place. We still have an unfunded obligation being paid off over time, but that number dropped from $145 billion to $57 billion. It's dramatic, the presentation of it on the financial statements. So apart from filling the hole, having a solid plan in place, you've also helped the financial status of the schools as they present this. What I would say now is, going forward, the burden now is on CalSTRS. We've got to do our work. You've done your work by putting in place a 32-year funding plan in law that gradually increases these contributions. Now we need to make our investment assumption. Right now it's 7.5%. That's been lowered over the years. The one thing I would encourage you and leave with you today, we've had some good years recently, and I truly hope we don't fall back into the problems we had before of overreacting to short-term gains or losses. The way we work this system, plan for this system, is over a 30-year period. So the returns are getting better, but we certainly expect, like always, there will be cycles to this. Our 5-year investment return is at 11%. And our 20-year number is 8.4%. So that's significantly over the investment assumption. But there's no one at CalSTRS and no advisors that we have and no investment professionals that we are advising us that are suggesting that that number should be moved higher from 7.5%. We really believe we need to stay in a conservative perspective going forward and do our best with the money. Last point I want to make is just of the value of this benefit to the teachers themselves. I'm not going to tell you necessarily that a defined benefit plan is perfect for every kind of employer. But for this profession particularly, this is a profession that works a long time being a teacher. The average years of service for a teacher is 24 years when they retire. There aren't many professions that you can find where they are 24 years in their profession when they reach retirement. And the research would tell you that the longer a teacher teaches, the more productive they become. So retaining teachers in the workforce and having the pension as a retention tool is an important human resource tool. It isn't just about giving people a good retirement, it's about making schools better. And we hope people see that is that combination of the needs of the schools, the needs of our children, and the rightful needs of workers to have a good retirement that comes together in this defined benefit plan. Yesterday I was in Washington, D.C. for a research institute going through findings around public pension plans. And I just wanted to, it was on public polling of Americans, and I was going to tell you the numbers of this poll about teachers. They asked Americans, do you support, please tell us whether you agree or disagree that public school teachers deserve pensions to compensate for lower pay. We've asked that question now 3 consecutive times in this poll, and it differs depending upon, and we try it with other types of public employees. As you can imagine, the answer is different who you're asking that question for. But for teachers, our customer base here, the results are resounding. In 2011, 68% of Americans strongly agreed that the teachers deserve these defined benefit pensions. In 2013, 72% of Americans agreed with that statement. And now this year, 75%. And it's interesting that that's the trajectory of the polling data. Given all the talk about public pensions, the difficulties of getting these unfunded obligations addressed, and the strain that's put on many fiscal budgets, but yet the public still feels strongly about teachers, strongly about the defined benefit being the tool for teachers. Lastly, I would just kind of looking forward, I know a lot of you spend time in thinking around the challenges of the environment and climate change. The governor's announced a number of initiatives around that area. I just want to tell you that is an area that our board also is spending a lot of educational time and a lot of thinking around sustainability. It isn't just about investing in interesting things. This is about risk. And we all had a terrible, terrible lesson in the last recession about understanding risk and managing risk. So we have to think differently, think harder, think more long term. And we recognize that these risks around climate change and other environmental factors do bear on the portfolio. Part of that may pose opportunities for us for investing in different ways in the future, but other parts of it may be in controlling risk in the portfolio as we see the value of these assets change over time in reaction to the changes in the economy. So I flag that for you because I think it's something the board feels strongly about. They have an educational program built out for the next year around learning more about sustainability. Investors in Europe are quite ahead of the United States in terms of how they look at their investment portfolios and how they're allocating their resources far differently than American public pension funds. And that's something that we need to look at as well. But in terms of new ideas and things that we can do better, I think that's an area that our board has a great deal of interest in. So is that a good whirlwind tour? And obviously there's a smile on my face this year. I don't have the recession frown for 10 years, so that feels good. Any questions or anything I can answer?
Thank you, Mr. Enos. I also want to welcome Senator Bell and Senator Morell. Thank you. And want to open it up to members for any questions or comments.
Yes, sir. Thank you very much.
Is my mic on?
It is.
You just happened to mention, and it caught my attention, about looking at Europe. I'm not sure what countries you're referencing to, but the little bit that I've read about over there, they seem to actually be in much worse problems than what we are. If you look at some of the countries like Portugal or
Mm,
Greece, so I'm not
absolutely.
sure who you're referencing.
It's not the, if I could, it's not the economies of the countries I'm referencing. I'm
No,
referencing
I
the,
meant
the pension.
pensions.
Yeah.
So specifically, that's what I was referring to. 'cause
You know, the
I
leader-
I thought we, though we have some challenges, seem to be in better shape than those. So who would you be referencing to, which country specifically, and then what are one or two things that they are doing differently?
The one country, I guess, you know, if you ask most researchers in public pension areas who the standout is in the world, it's without a doubt the Netherlands. They are conservative in many ways. They have very strict funding rules. So unlike the states in the United States, like Illinois, that has neglected to pay its ARC year after year after year and underfunded that plan, there are very strict triggers in the law in the Netherlands. So one part of it is the overall governance structure of the pension plan is far more rigid, far more demanding, and as a result keeps the plan out of trouble much more than many U.S. plans. The second
No, go ahead.
part is the
like-
investment strategy itself. That's actually the decision-making of the investors themselves. And it is that area where I would say they've explored areas of long-term risk more than other plans have and are thinking through their investment strategies differently than others, particularly around issues like climate change and environmental threats.
And then how about their contributions? Is that different?
Well, they're higher
Percentage?
often because the funding rules are tougher,
So they're higher for the contributions from the teachers and,
and the employer,
okay,
because they're tougher.
yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Cooley.
Just to comment, Jack, by way of follow-up, another aspect of Europe is you have international reinsurers, so not the primary insurers, but reinsurers, very important part of the insurance business. A lot of them in Europe, they've looked very hard at how climate change affects the risks they insure. Jack has been active for probably 8 or 10 years with the National Association of Insurance Commissioners, looking at how these changes. So he's here today and bringing up the issue of climate change, but he's been active in sort of the national and international conversation as affecting the insurance business in this country. And I guess the Ceres organization is still
correct.
very much out there on sort of how these climate change and financial risk intertwine.
Exactly. Ceres is a not-for-profit in Boston, and actually Ann Stossball and I are on its board. But they really have organized a large body of investors throughout the world now that are focused on this issue. And I thank you for mentioning the reinsurance industry. Most people kind of view them as some hidden arm and don't know what they are. But I will tell you, Swiss Re and Munich Re are very significant financial players in the market and are very advanced in their modeling of risk and bring a lot of deep thought to the conversations. I appreciate you saying that.
Any other comments or questions?
Thank you very much.
I just want to take the opportunity to thank you for your tremendous leadership last year in working with a broader coalition, which was part of what I think a very successful team effort of multiple stakeholders to help bring about the full funding plan for CalSTRS. So I appreciate your smile, and I'm glad
it was
you had
an
that.
amazing experience. And I'm so pleased it was a bipartisan experience, I have to say.
Me
It
too.
makes the story much better. Thank you.
Thank you for your service and
All right.
leadership. Next, we'll have Ann Stossball and Ted Eliopoulos, Chief Executive Officer and Chief Investment Officer, respectively, of CalPERS. Welcome.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Bonta, Dr. Pan, and members. This is Ted Eliopoulos, our Chief Investment Officer, and I thought it would be good for you also to meet Danny Brown. Some of you know him. He's the Chief of Legislative Affairs and probably the one you see the most. I'm Ann Stousball. I'm CEO of CalPERS. I'm starting my 7th year. 13 seems like a long time. Thanks for inviting us today. And what we want to do is provide you with an overview of CalPERS and our functions with a look at the value of defined benefit plans, and then give you an update on the financial health of the fund and our plans going forward. And then Ted will give you an overview of the investment portfolio. Do you have gray packets up there? Great. And there's a deck in there with a blue cover that's will help you follow along. So our mission is to deliver retirement as well as health benefits to public sector employees. we're the country's largest public pension plan. Underline our pension plan is an investment portfolio that's currently valued at about $300 billion. And we're also the second largest public purchaser of health care behind the federal government. Our headquarters are here in Sacramento, over at 400 P Street and along the R Street corridor, and we'd love to have you come visit. In addition to the Sacramento office, we've got 7 regional offices throughout the state for our members. We administer retirement benefits. That's our core function for over 1.7 million active and retired employees and their families and beneficiaries. And we do that on behalf of the state, school employers, as well as public agencies, cities, counties, and special districts. So participation by the state and CSU, as well as the school districts, is mandatory. And then we contract with about 1,500 local agencies. For them, participation is optional. And our primary functions are to administer and deliver the benefits, set the actuarially required contribution rates, which is different than CalSTRS, as you heard, and to manage the investment portfolio. And importantly, CalPERS, I think for everyone to understand, CalPERS does not set the benefit levels. Historically, those have been set through a combination of bargaining and legislation. And then to calculate our benefits, there's a formula that you've probably heard of. It uses a factor that's based on your age at retirement, multiplied by years of service and final compensation. And then comes up with the defined benefit, which is a guaranteed payment for life that the member will receive. So with the passage of PEPRA, with the pension reform, our new members, as of January 1, 2013, are subject to several reforms. They have a lower formula than what we call the classic members who predated that. That formula increased the retirement age, and they have a cap on compensation that can be used to calculate pensions, and then a mandated 3-year final compensation period for everybody, which was intended to control spiking. So we estimate those reforms will save tens of billions of dollars over the next 30 years. And the implementation has gone very well to date. So how are these pensions paid for? Our current annual payout from CalPERS is about $18 billion in payments. You have one of these in your folder. We call it the pension buck. For every dollar that we pay out in pensions, 67 cents comes from investment earnings, and then 21 cents comes from employer contributions, and 12 cents from employee contributions. So you can see the bulk of it comes from investment earnings, and that's how important the management of our investment portfolio is. The employee contributions are set through bargaining, or in statute, but through bargaining, employees can agree to pay more. And then CalPERS sets the employer contributions. Our in-house actuaries do that, and then our board adopts the rates.